What if becoming the king or queen didn't make you powerful? What if it just made you completely unhinged? That's exactly what happened to history's most notorious rulers. These aren't legends or fairy tales. They're real monarchs who ruled kingdoms while battling delusions, paranoia, and full-blown madness. There's the king who thought he was made of glass and treated every hug like an assassination attempt, and the queen who kept her dead husband's rotting corpse as a travel companion, because apparently, "you complete me" includes the afterlife. Tonight, we're walking through palaces where the greatest threat wasn't invaders or traitors. It was the ruler on the throne, probably talking to furniture. Welcome to the 23 craziest kings and queens in history. Before we dive into the royal chaos, if you love the kind of stories that make you think, maybe democracy isn't so bad after all, hit that subscribe button and join us on this wild ride. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? New York at 3 a.m.? London past midnight? Wherever you are, join us as we wander through history's most entertainingly disturbed corridors. Let's begin. The year is 605 BC, and Babylon is about to dazzle the world with its brilliance. A young man of about 30 has just inherited the throne of the greatest empire on earth. His name is Nebuchadnezzar II, and his father, Nabopolassar, had just won a massive military victory against Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish, then immediately died. Talk about perfect timing. The man literally won the biggest battle of his life and said, "All right, I'm out. You handle the paperwork, son." If you're going to die, doing it right after your greatest triumph is basically the ancient world's equivalent of dropping the mic and moonwalking off stage. Nebuchadnezzar is exactly the sort of king that history dreams about writing fan fiction for. He's ambitious, pious, and utterly convinced that destiny has written his name in gold, with sparkles and maybe some fireworks. And here's the annoying part. He's absolutely right. This man spends the next 4 decades transforming Babylon into such a ridiculously over-the-top wonder that people 2,000 years later will still argue about whether it actually existed, or if ancient writers just had really vivid imaginations after too much wine. Did they really have hanging gardens with water flowing uphill, or did someone just hallucinate after eating bad dates? Historians are still fighting about this in academic journals, which is honestly the most passive-aggressive form of gossip ever invented. Picture ziggurats piercing the clouds like giants reaching toward heaven. Imagine terraced gardens cascading down in emerald waves, defying the desert itself, the legendary hanging gardens with water flowing uphill. Walls so massive that visiting kings literally weep with envy. Imagine being a foreign diplomat thinking, well, our capital looks like a mud hut now. Nebuchadnezzar builds a monument to himself so incredible that everyone else's cities suddenly look like they were designed by toddlers with sticks. Babylon becomes the envy of empires, the dream every other king desperately wishes they had thought of first. But here's where the story gets darker. In 586 BC, a rebellion breaks out in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar's response is swift and merciless. He destroys Solomon's temple, one of the most sacred places in the entire ancient world, and drags thousands of Jewish people into exile in Babylon. Not just once, but many times, over years, in waves. To the conquered peoples of Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar is a monster, a tyrant, history's villain. To his own people, he's the defender of Babylon's gods. It's all about perspective. And then comes the twist that God himself seems to have written. According to the book of Daniel, chapter 4, at the absolute peak of his power, Nebuchadnezzar receives a terrifying dream. He sees an enormous tree reaching to the heavens, providing food and shelter for every creature. Then a holy messenger descends with a chilling decree. Cut down the tree. but leave the stump. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and live with the animals. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him." Daniel, the Jewish prophet in Nebuchadnezzar's court, interprets the dream. The tree is Nebuchadnezzar himself. Because of his overwhelming pride, the king will be driven away to live with wild animals until he acknowledges that heaven rules over all kingdoms. Daniel begs him, "Renounce your sins by doing what is right. It may be that then your prosperity will continue." For 12 months, nothing happens. Then the king walks on his palace roof, surveying his glorious city, and speaks the words that seal his fate.
"Is not this the great Babylon I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?"
Immediately judgment falls. Daniel 4:33 records what happens next. "He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird." The mighty king loses his mind completely. He goes genuinely mad and begins living like cattle. He eats grass, actual grass. His hair grows long and matted. His fingernails curl into claws. The man who once commanded nations now scratches in the dirt. For 7 times, the greatest king on earth becomes less than human. The builder of wonders becomes a beast. But here's where the biblical account becomes truly remarkable. Unlike most tales of fallen kings, this one doesn't end in death or permanent disgrace. Daniel 4:34 records Nebuchadnezzar's own testimony.
"At the end of that time, I raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored."
The moment he acknowledges the sovereignty of the God of heaven, his reason returns. His honor is restored. He is reinstated on his throne and becomes even greater than before. The humbled king writes his own account, preserved in Daniel chapter 4, essentially the only ancient royal inscription where a king openly admits to losing his mind and eating grass. It's brutally honest, and unlike anything else in ancient propaganda. He concludes,
"Now I praise and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble."
Historians love debating this tale. Some scholars suggest it mixes Nebuchadnezzar with Nabonidus, a later king who mysteriously vanished into Arabia for years. Whether genuine madness, divine judgment, or political exile dressed up in religious robes, the legend stuck. It became the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when pride grows too tall. After Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC, Babylon limped along for 2 more decades before Persia swallowed the empire whole in 539 BC. The king who built wonders could not build an empire that lasted. A weak succession of rulers and internal conflict tore apart everything he had created, proving that even the most magnificent kingdom is only as strong as those who come after. So, dear dreamer, remember that Nebuchadnezzar's tale whispers something ancient and true. No earthly power is immune to the humbling force of madness, whether sent by gods or born within the mind itself. The biblical account frames it as divine judgment against pride, a lesson that the Most High rules over all kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar himself declared that those who walk in pride will be humbled. The mightiest fortress can crumble from within. And perhaps that is the real lesson, that glory without wisdom is only a beautiful tomb waiting to be filled. But this is only the beginning. Centuries would pass, empires would crumble and rise, and then a young Roman emperor would inherit a throne and take insanity to heights that would make Nebuchadnezzar's affliction look almost quaint. Chapter 2. Caligula. the emperor who thought he was a god. It is March in the year AD 37, and Rome is holding its breath. The old emperor Tiberius is dead. In his place stands a young man of just 24. His name is Gaius, though everyone calls him Caligula. Little Boot, a nickname he earned as a child waddling about in miniature military sandals amongst soldiers. Picture a toddler in combat boots. That's your emperor's origin story. The crowds are absolutely delighted. Here, they believe, is salvation. The handsome heir of Rome's most beloved military hero, the grandson of Augustus himself, the man destined to restore their empire to greatness. Basically, they'd ordered a puppy and were thrilled when it arrived at the palace. Then, late in AD 37, everything goes catastrophically wrong. Caligula falls violently, mysteriously ill. Ancient doctors scratch their heads and offer no explanation. Modern historians whisper it might have been encephalitis or perhaps epilepsy, but honestly, who knows? What we do know is this. When he recovers weeks later, something fundamental has short-circuited inside his brain. The merciful young ruler who promised hope. Gone. In his place emerges something altogether more sinister. It's like someone flipped a switch from kind emperor straight to unhinged villain, with absolutely no middle ground. And so begins one of history's most bewildering reigns of terror and absolute nonsense. Between AD 38 and 40, Caligula decides he's a living god. Not metaphorically, not even close. He dresses as Apollo one day, as Venus the next, and expects Rome's most powerful men to treat him like actual divinity. He builds a temple dedicated to his own worship, which is essentially history's most expensive ego project. He orders a golden statue of himself, erected in Jerusalem's holiest temple, an act so offensive it nearly sparked a religious revolution. The man had genuinely never heard the word chill. His behavior toward Rome's senators was equally unhinged. Imagine being one of the most powerful men in the world. Then imagine having to grovel before someone young enough to be your grandson while he watches you crawl like a pet. That was Tuesday for Roman senators under Caligula. At one particularly grim banquet, he bursts into uncontrollable laughter. When asked what's so funny, Suetonius records him saying something absolutely chilling. He was amused by the fact that he could have every single person in that room executed on a whim. That's not a joke. That's a threat wearing a comedy mask, and everyone in that room could feel the ice in their veins. Now, Caligula's favorite companion during all this madness was a horse named Incitatus, and not just any horse. This creature lived in marble stalls with servants attending to his every need like he was a Roman celebrity. Ancient gossip claims Caligula considered making him a consul, which would be like promoting your dog to CEO. Absolutely bonkers. Historians debate whether he meant it literally or whether it was theatrical mockery meant to humiliate the Senate. Either way, the message was crystal clear. Even a horse could do your job. At one point, Caligula actually marched his armies to invade Britain. Then he just stopped, abandoned the whole thing. Instead, he ordered his troops to collect seashells from the beach and declared them spoils of war, as though he'd conquered the ocean itself. Then, and this is where it gets truly theatrical, he built a floating bridge across the entire Bay of Baiae, so he could ride his horse across open water like some sort of deranged water-skiing god. An astrologer had once told him he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of doing exactly that. So Caligula built it, just to prove him wrong, just to obliterate him with pure, vindictive spectacle. But beneath all this grandiose theater lurked something far darker, utterly paralyzing paranoia. Caligula had grown up watching his own family systematically destroyed under Tiberius. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, was exiled and left to starve. His brothers Nero and Drusus died rotting in prison. And now, suddenly, he held absolute power over Rome with absolutely no checks. No restraints, nobody to stop him. His childhood trauma, combined with whatever illness had damaged his mind, spiraled into something genuinely monstrous. When you give a traumatized person with possible brain damage complete control over an empire, you don't get a good outcome. Was Caligula truly insane, or simply breathtakingly cruel? Ancient sources are hopelessly biased, written by people desperate to paint him as a cautionary tale. But the pattern is unmistakable. Grandiosity, violence, paranoia, total disconnection from reality. He basically invented the template for every mad emperor that would follow. In January AD 41, members of the Praetorian Guard, Rome's own elite soldiers, cornered Caligula in a palace corridor and stabbed him to death. The Senate immediately scrambled to erase his memory, destroying his statues, scrubbing his name from records. But you cannot erase what Rome had learned. When mental illness meets absolute power, an empire itself becomes the stage for one man's delusions. And once that damage is done, it echoes forward through history like a terrible warning nobody wants to hear. Yet if Rome thought Caligula represented the absolute depths of imperial depravity, they had no idea what was coming. The next emperor would transform cruelty into art, murder into theater, and set the very city ablaze for the finale. And so we arrive at Emperor Nero, the man who would make Caligula look like a cautious accountant. If you're still here, then you already know you're in the right place. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next descent into royal history. And tell us in the comments, where are you tuning in from? Are you bundled in bed in Boston or doom-scrolling at dawn in Dublin? We want to know, because viewers like you, the ones who stick around for the darkness, that's who we make this for. Chapter 3. Nero, the emperor who sang while Rome burned. It is AD 54, and Rome welcomes a new emperor. His name is Nero. He is just 16 years old. The Senate hopes for the best. They believe his mother, Agrippina, the philosopher Seneca, and the military commander Burrus will guide him wisely. And at first, they do. The early years are actually good. Tax relief floods the provinces. Public games entertain the crowds. The arts flourish under imperial patronage. These are the 5 good years of Nero, and Rome is almost content. But Nero harbors a dangerous dream. He doesn't want to be a soldier emperor. He wants to be an artist, a performer. He takes the stage and sings. He plays the lyre. He acts in theatrical productions. The Roman elite are absolutely appalled. This is beneath an emperor's dignity. This is madness. But the common people? They love it. They cheer. They adore him. They want more. Then, in AD 59, everything shatters. Nero decides his own mother is the problem. Agrippina has too much influence. She controls him. So he arranges her assassination near the town of Baiae. His plan is absolutely ridiculous. He builds a collapsing boat designed to kill her. It doesn't work. She survives and swims to shore, so he sends assassins instead. They succeed where the boat failed. His own mother is dead by his command. And here's the terrifying truth. After murdering his own mother, Nero's conscience simply ceases to exist. There are no more moral boundaries. Nothing he won't do. Nothing is too cruel. Nothing is too vain. Nothing is too destructive. It is July AD 64, and Rome catches fire. The Great Fire devastates the city. Entire neighborhoods vanish in flames. Thousands die. Families burn alive in their homes. The destruction is total and catastrophic. Legend says Nero fiddled while Rome burned. But fiddles didn't exist in Rome. The real story is that he supposedly sang of Troy's destruction while the city blazed. He was probably at his villa in Antium when the fire started. He actually returned to help with relief efforts, but rumors spread like wildfire. Nero set the blaze deliberately. He wanted to clear space for his new palace. He burned Rome to make room for his vanity project. To silence the accusations, Nero points his finger at the Christians. A tiny, unpopular sect. Easy targets. He orders Rome's first recorded persecution of Christians. Many are burned alive as human torches in his gardens. Others are torn apart by wild beasts in front of cheering crowds. His name becomes forever linked with their suffering. By AD 65, a conspiracy to overthrow him is discovered. The Pisonian plot. Every noble in Rome suddenly looks suspicious. Nero's paranoia explodes like a volcano. He executes dozens, including his former mentor Seneca. He orders the old philosopher to take his own life. Terror grips Rome as Nero sees traitors in every shadow, in every whisper, in every conversation. Meanwhile, he's building his masterpiece. The Domus Aurea, the Golden House, an obscenely opulent palace with a colossal statue of himself dominating the entrance. A statue so massive it can be seen from all over the city, watching Rome like a god. He drains the treasury paying for it, while he fashions himself as a divine artist emperor. A living god, a being beyond mortal consequence. By AD 66 and 67, the provinces are revolting. Judea is burning in rebellion. The empire is tearing itself apart. But Nero doesn't care. He tours Greece instead. He forces cities to hold athletic and artistic contests so he can participate and win them all. He crowns himself athletic champion in every single competition. He awards himself victory after victory. His detachment from reality is now complete. He has become a god in his own mind. He is performing for an audience that no longer exists, an applause that rings only in his imagination. In June AD 68, the Senate and legions finally turn against him. Declared a public enemy, Nero flees the city. Alone. Hunted. No applause now. No adoring crowds. Just silence. He takes his own life at 30 years old, whispering words nobody wanted to hear. What an artist dies in me. The bloodline of Augustus, the Julio-Claudian dynasty that had ruled Rome for nearly a century, ends in chaos and death. But if Rome had endured mad emperors, history was far from finished with madness. 1,000 years later, in medieval France, a beloved king would suffer a breakdown so complete he wouldn't recognize his own wife or remember his own name. Chapter 4. Charles VI of France. The Glass King Who Shattered. It is the year 1380. France crowns a new king. His name is Charles. He is just 11 years old. A boy. A child in a crown. The nobles bow before him at the cathedral in Reims. They whisper promises of a glorious future. Charles the Beloved, they call him. The kingdom seems to approve. For years, regents and his uncles guide him. Then, in 1388, Charles dismisses them all. He is ready to rule alone now. 23 years old, educated, thoughtful. Reform sweeps through France. Good governance returns. The kingdom flourishes. Charles the Beloved seems destined for greatness. Charles the Great. That's what history should have called him. Then comes the 5th of August, 1392. Everything shatters. The king is marching toward Le Mans with his army. Battle awaits against the Duke of Brittany. It is a hot day. The road is long. The sun is relentless. Suddenly, with no warning, Charles snaps. He attacks his own men. His eyes go wild. Foam froths from his mouth. He strikes down a knight with his sword before anyone can stop him. Guards rush to restrain him. Then, just as suddenly, he collapses. Complete trance. Unconscious. Unresponsive. Silent. When he wakes, he remembers nothing. This is the moment everything changes. From now until his death, Charles will suffer recurring bouts of madness. 30 years. Over and over again, the king's mind simply breaks. During his attacks, Charles loses all sense of who he is. His own wife? He doesn't recognize her. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria stands before him, and he sees a stranger. His own children. He has no idea who they are. He looks at his reflection and doesn't know the face staring back. One chronicler records something truly extraordinary and terrifying. The glass delusion. Charles believes he is made of glass. Not metaphorically. Literally. Transparent. Fragile. Breakable. He becomes absolutely terrified that if anyone touches him, he will shatter into pieces, into fragments, into nothing. So he wears reinforced clothing underneath his robes, padding himself like armor. He forbids anyone from embracing him. No hugs, no contact, nothing. The mighty King of France has convinced himself he is too fragile to be human. During his episodes, witnesses report something even more disturbing. Charles howls like a wolf. He runs through palace corridors, screaming at invisible threats. He refuses to bathe for months, becoming filthy and lice-ridden. Some spells last weeks, some last months. His longest episode? From 1395 to 1396. Over a year completely unresponsive. A year silent, broken, lost inside his own fractured mind. But here's the terrible truth. Charles's personal tragedy becomes France's national catastrophe. With the king incapacitated, the kingdom begins to fracture. Two powerful factions emerge, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. Both want to control the regency. Both want power. Their rivalry erupts into open civil war. In 1407, the Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless, orders the assassination of the Duke of Orleans. Charles's own brother is murdered. France tears itself apart while the king sits locked in his palace, lost in madness, completely unaware of the war destroying everything around him. On the 25th of October in 1415, at a place called Agincourt, something catastrophic happens. England's King Henry V crushes the divided French forces in battle. The English army is smaller. The French should win, but France is divided. The king is incapacitated. Nobody can unite them. Nobody can lead them. The English slaughter them anyway. By 1420, the Treaty of Troyes is signed. It names Henry V as heir to the French throne. Charles's own son, the Dauphin, who will become Charles VII, is disinherited. Cast aside. The treaty describes the king with these chilling words: under a strange malady and not accountable. Not accountable. A king without the capacity to rule his own mind, much less his own kingdom. On the 21st of October in 1422, Charles VI dies in Paris at 53 years old. He has spent more than half his reign intermittently insane. His son Charles VII, aided by a peasant girl named Joan of Arc, will eventually restore the kingdom to some semblance of unity. But the scars run deep. The glass king has shattered, and with him, France's unity shattered too. His tragedy revealed to medieval Europe something terrifying: how fragile a kingdom truly is, how one man's fragile mind can destroy an entire empire. and Charles VI's madness would not end with his death. It would flow through royal blood across the Channel, until another crown and another mind began to fracture in turn. Chapter 5. Henry VI of England, the saint who couldn't save his kingdom. It is the year 1422. England welcomes a new king. His name is Henry. He is 8 months old. 8 months. A baby in a crown. His father, Henry V, is already a legend. The warrior king. The conqueror. But Henry V is dead now, leaving behind a widow and an infant. The widow is Catherine of Valois. She is just 20 years old. Young. Beautiful. Alone with a kingdom that needs a man, not a baby. Under the Treaty of Troyes, this tiny child is also the titular king of France. So England and France now belong to someone who cannot even walk. As Henry grows, one thing becomes clear. He is nothing like his father. Nothing at all. His father was a warrior. Henry is shy, pious, scholarly. He loves books and prayer more than he loves power. In 1440, he founds Eton College. In 1441, he establishes King's College, Cambridge. He would rather spend his time with monks and manuscripts than with soldiers and strategy. But while Henry prays, England bleeds. Territory after territory falls to France. By 1453, England has lost every inch of French land except for one small city, Calais. The 100 Years' War, which England once seemed destined to win, is collapsing, and Henry seems utterly unconcerned. Then comes August 1453. News arrives of a devastating defeat at Castile in July. The last English stronghold in France falls. The war is over. England has lost. And something inside Henry's mind simply breaks. He becomes completely unresponsive, a state so profound that historians still debate whether it's a medical condition or just the world's longest "I'm not listening" phase. He cannot speak, recognize anyone, or react to anything. He simply sits motionless, staring into the middle distance with the focus of a man who has discovered the one foolproof way to avoid making any royal decisions. For once, nobody can blame him for the kingdom's problems. His son, Edward, is born in October 1453. The heir to the throne. The future of England arrives in the world. Henry shows no reaction. Nothing. Even when they place the infant directly in front of him, Henry stares through him like he's invisible. 17 months. That's how long Henry remains trapped in this catatonic state. 17 months of silence, of absence, of a king who is present in body, but absent from everything else. Except Henry remembers nothing. Not a single moment of the past year. He's essentially a man who went to bed as king and woke up as a medieval amnesiac, which would be awkward enough without the added complication that his nobles have spent 12 months using his absence to completely reshape the political landscape. "So what happened while I was asleep?" he asks cheerfully. His advisors exchange nervous glances. "Well, sire, it's complicated." And now the damage is done. During those 17 months while Henry was lost, his cousin Richard, Duke of York, was appointed Lord Protector. York now controls the kingdom. York now holds the real power. Queen Margaret of Anjou, Henry's wife, is furious. She watches her son's inheritance slip away into York's hands. The seeds of civil war have been planted, and they are already beginning to grow. On the 22nd of May in 1455, Henry's forces are attacked at St. Albans. Afterwards, he's found sitting beneath a tree, dazed, unresponsive, and apparently determining that his brief recovery wasn't worth the trouble. The Wars of the Roses have begun. For the next 20 years, Henry's sanity becomes a flickering candle, and not in a poetic way. It's more in a is he lucid or isn't he way that makes governing nearly impossible. When he's present, he's genuinely kind and desperate for peace. Unfortunately, a pacifist king during a civil war is like showing up to a sword fight with a strongly worded letter. His gentle nature is admirable. It's also a political death sentence. He becomes a puppet. When Margaret controls him, he moves. When the Yorkists capture him, they move. Him. He is shuffled about like a game piece, powerless and forgotten. In 1461, Edward, the Duke of York's son, defeats the royal army and becomes Edward IV. Henry flees north with Queen Margaret, wandering homeless for years until he's captured in 1465. From 1465 to 1470, Henry languishes in the Tower of London, a prisoner in his own kingdom. In October 1470, the kingmaker, Warwick, briefly restores him to the throne. Witnesses describe Henry as feeble, simply laughing when told he was king again. Like it's a joke. Like it's not real. His second reign lasts barely 6 months. On the 21st of May in 1471, soon after his son's death at the Battle of Tewkesbury, Henry VI is murdered in the Tower of London, almost certainly on Edward IV's orders. He is 49 years old, a gentleman, a devout man, a king who was tragically unfit for his violent age. Henry VI was not cruel. He was not vicious. His tragedy was the opposite. He was too kind for a kingdom that demanded cruelty. His collapse didn't just end a reign. It plunged England into decades of civil war. The Saint King's mind broke under the weight of a violent world, and with it, his entire realm shattered. But if Henry VI inherited madness from his French grandfather, another royal bloodline was brewing its own catastrophe. One that would span centuries, one that would produce kings so inbred and unstable they'd barely cling to sanity itself. Chapter 6. George III of Great Britain, the king who talked to oak trees. It is the year 1760. Britain crowns a new king. His name is George. He is 22 years old, young, conscientious, devoted to his family. They call him Farmer George, not because he's a great warrior or military strategist, not because he conquered anything or inspired nations. No, they call him Farmer George because he spends his royal time reading about crop rotation. He loves agriculture. He breeds cattle. He discusses turnips with the intensity most kings reserve for warfare. Basically, he's a man who inherited the most powerful empire on earth and decided to become obsessed with vegetables. For 28 years, he somehow makes this work. He rules competently. He watches America slip away like a disappointing breakup. He navigates the Napoleonic Wars. It's all fine, manageable, boring, honestly. Then comes autumn 1788. George is 50 years old. A fever shows up. Seems like nothing serious. Maybe he just needs to rest. Maybe he's eaten too many turnips. But then his brain decides to audition for a circus act. He becomes hyper-talkative, absolutely unhinged. He talks for 6 hours without stopping. Not normal talking, not conversation. This is rambling. Pure, unfiltered, stream of consciousness madness. Each sentence is a completely different topic with zero connection to the last one. He's describing the weather, then suddenly German poetry, then royal taxes, then why pigeons are suspicious. And then he switches to German mid-sentence, just randomly. In the middle of explaining something, he's like, "The parliamentary situation is quite dire, and absolutely we must consider the blah blah blah. Guten Tag, was ist dein Lieblingsfrucht?" His words come so fast he literally foams at the mouth from speaking, like a rabid dog, except the dog is wearing a crown and screaming about his dinner. His letters from this period are absolutely unhinged. Endless run-on sentences, topics jumping from his breakfast to the state of the empire to whether clouds have feelings. It's like someone gave him infinite caffeine and asked him to write a novel. Stark contrast to his normally careful, controlled prose. This is not the careful turnip king anymore. This is a man whose brain is short-circuiting live in front of the entire court. Court diarist Fanny Burney, who actually witnessed this, records, "The king talked 6 hours without pause, each sentence an idea not connected to the last." She basically invented the term for manic psychosis without calling it that. She was just like, "Mate, your king has completely lost it. He suffers severe insomnia, delusions, agitation. He hallucinates. At one point, in confused rage, he attempts to physically assault his own son, the Prince of Wales. The king is trying to fight his kid, throwing fists at the royal heir. It's chaos. It's violence. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's also completely hilarious in the most tragic way possible. Then come the doctors with their treatments. 18th century medicine is basically torture, disguised as helpfulness. They blister his skin. They induce vomiting. They attach leeches to drain his blood. Each procedure is pure agony, and none of it works. Imagine being the mad king, and your treatment plan is literally, "We're going to make everything worse, but we'll smile while doing it." Then arrives Francis Willis. This doctor is different. He's like, "What if we tried not torturing him?" Revolutionary concept for 1788, he calls it moral therapy. Basically just being nice to him. Outdoor walks, fresh air. A straitjacket when absolutely necessary, but mostly just treating him like a human being. Absolutely wild. And somehow it works. By February 1789, George miraculously recovers. His mind clears. He's lucid. Britain loses its collective mind with joy. Literally, they're celebrating like he won the lottery. The Regency bill is dropped. The crisis is over. The king is back. The kingdom is saved. Champagne everywhere. Parties. Fireworks. Everyone's happy. But here's the thing about untreated mental illness. It doesn't just disappear because you got better once. In 1801, political crisis triggers another breakdown. He's back in the spiral. He recovers again, but barely. Then it happens again. And again. Each time he fragments a little more. Each time the recovery takes longer. It's like watching a light bulb flicker more and more frequently until you know it's going to burn out. Then, in October 1810, his beloved daughter Amelia dies. George is in his 70s now, nearly blind from cataracts, and he descends into his final permanent insanity. This time, he won't come back. This time, it's forever. Blind, completely deranged, absolutely lost in his own mind, George shakes hands with an oak tree at Windsor. He's convinced it's the King of Prussia. He's out here trying to have a diplomatic conversation with a tree. A blind king greeting a tree like it's an old friend from court. That's your legacy, mate. Not the wars, not the agriculture, not the turnips. It's this. The moment a blind king saluted a tree and called it the King of Prussia. In 1811, Parliament passes the Regency Act. His son becomes Prince Regent and actually runs the kingdom. George is officially benched. For the next 9 years, he lives in seclusion at Windsor, often in a straitjacket during raving episodes. He hallucinates conversations with long-dead relatives. Sometimes he sings folk songs endlessly at 3 a.m. Sometimes he scolds imaginary servants like they owe him money. Music is one of the only things that calms him. Handel's oratorios. He weeps hearing them. Perhaps in those moments, some fragment of the old George, the careful king, the devoted father, the turnip enthusiast, flickers back to life for just a second. On January 29th, 1820, King George III dies at 81. Blind, deaf, mentally lost, effectively absent from rule for 9 years. The mad king who talked to trees had somehow become a symbol of unexpected compassion. His subjects never stopped respecting him. They saw not ridicule, but dignity in suffering. They saw a man broken by forces beyond his control, and loved him anyway. Yet Britain's mad king would have company. Across Europe, another devout monarch was descending into her own nightmare. Convinced devils tormented her, screaming through palace halls about her damnation. Chapter 7. Maria the Pious, when a queen's mind became her prison. The year is 1777, and Portugal gains something revolutionary, a queen who rules entirely on her own. Her name is Maria I, and she arrives at the throne at 42 with enlightened ideals, Renaissance energy, and an unstoppable determination to drag Portugal into the modern world. She champions education, supports the arts, reverses oppressive policies. The people call her Maria the Pious. Basically, she's absolutely dominating this whole ruling thing. Then 1786 arrives like a thief in the night. Her husband Pedro III dies, and Maria doesn't just grieve him. She shatters. They were inseparable partners, the kind that real-life romance novels are made of, except with more Portuguese formality and significantly fewer abs. 2 years later, in 1788, her eldest son and heir José is claimed by smallpox at 27. That same year, her spiritual confessor also dies. 3 people. Gone. Within 2 years. It is simply too much. Seriously, the universe was just showing off at this point. By 1790, the courtiers notice something is catastrophically wrong. Maria weeps without warning. She refuses to appear at court. She locks herself away, praying obsessively, whipping herself in penance for crimes she cannot name. But here's where it gets properly bonkers. She insists she's damned to hell. Visions of devils torment her. And then the screaming starts. Residents of Lisbon hear their sovereign wailing in the darkness like a woman possessed. Not metaphorically. Literally. At night. In the palace. Loudly. Maria genuinely believes she's committed an unforgivable sin and that God's wrath is now falling upon all of Portugal because of her personal guilt, which is a wild amount of responsibility to place on yourself, honestly. Meanwhile, state business has completely collapsed because nobody can get her to sign literally anything. By 1792, it cannot be hidden. Physicians, including the famous Dr. Francis Willis, fresh from treating mad King George III of England, examine the Queen and deliver their diagnosis: complete alienation of mind. She is utterly incapable of ruling. Her son João becomes regent. Maria remains queen in name only, though she will never truly rule again. She oscillates between catatonic numbness and explosive terror. She dresses perpetually in mourning black, like she's decided fashion is now permanently cancelled. She sits for hours beside her dead son José's portrait, speaking to it as if he's alive, which is both deeply sad and deeply awkward for the ladies-in-waiting who have to witness this. Other times she erupts into rants about hellfire, demanding mass after mass after mass, convinced that if she just prays enough, suffers enough, maybe God will take pity on her. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work that way. The palace moves her to quieter caloos. Her chambers are padded and private. Physicians try everything the era has to offer: cold baths, opium, bloodletting. Nothing works. It's less medicine and more desperate guessing with potentially lethal consequences. Then, in 1807, Napoleon invades. The royal family flees to Brazil, and Maria, strapped to a chair and moaning, is carried aboard ship. The 3-month voyage is pure agony for a woman whose mind has already shipwrecked into its own personal storm. One envoy, years later, describes seeing her in Rio, a piteous spectre with wild eyes and disheveled hair, gently led by her ladies humming church hymns, lost between worlds. Maria lived nearly 24 more years in that fractured state. She died in Rio in March 1816 at 81, and her body was eventually returned to Lisbon for burial. The Portuguese remembered her with profound sadness as the pious queen who went mad. But here's the thing that absolutely haunts us. Maria was not weak. She was not foolish. She was brilliant, enlightened, genuinely good. She was a woman whose mind was devastated by losses so catastrophic that it simply broke. And in breaking, she taught history a sobering truth, that trauma recognizes no rank, that grief can topple crowns just as easily as ordinary hearts. Yet religious madness and royal breakdowns weren't limited to recent centuries. Centuries earlier in Sweden, a Renaissance prince would paint, compose music, and dream of enlightened rule. He would be everything Maria tried to be, until paranoia transformed him into something far, far darker, a murderer, a monster, a man whose genius became his damnation. Chapter 8. Erik XIV of Sweden, the Renaissance prince who became a killer. The year is 1560, and Sweden gains a king who seems absolutely destined for greatness. His name is Erik XIV, eldest son of Gustav Vasa, the man who liberated Sweden from Danish rule. Erik is intelligent, fluent in multiple languages, fascinated by astronomy and art. He's a true Renaissance prince with enormous ambitions. He wants to strengthen the monarchy, expand Swedish power across the Baltic, even tries to marry Queen Elizabeth I of England. The man is thinking big. But here's the problem. Erik is also deeply, profoundly insecure. His temperament is mercurial, which is a fancy word for absolutely unstable. One moment he's charming and brilliant, the next he's flying into rages at the slightest perceived insult. He suspects everyone. The noble council? Plotting against him. His own half-brothers, John and Charles? Definitely plotting against him. Possibly the guy who brings him breakfast? Probably plotting against him too. Between 1563 and 1567, Sweden fights the Northern 7 Years' War against Denmark. War is stressful for anyone. For a paranoid king with a tenuous grip on reality, it's absolutely catastrophic. Erik's distrust of the nobility becomes toxic, poisonous, all-consuming. He starts favoring lower-born advisors like Göran Persson, men he thinks are loyal because they have less to gain by betraying him. His relationship with the aristocracy deteriorates into open hostility. Then May 1567 arrives. Erik is at Uppsala Castle, and he becomes absolutely convinced that leading nobles of the Sture family are plotting to overthrow him. So he has them arrested, locked them up. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Something in Erik's mind snaps completely. The sanity just leaves the building. He bursts into the cell of Niels Sture and stabs him repeatedly with a dagger. According to chronicles, the king is foaming at the mouth, with wild and strange eyes, clearly in a full psychotic break. Over the next hours, Erik orders the killing of other detained nobles. The scene is absolutely horrific. A king transformed into a blood-soaked madman before everyone's eyes. And then it's over. The frenzy ends. Erik falls into a depressive, almost catatonic stupor. He deeply regrets his actions. Legend says he tries to abdicate in remorse, wandering through the countryside in disguise out of sheer shame. The Stura murders are a catastrophe for Erik's authority. Nobles now see him as dangerously unstable, not just temperamental, not just difficult, dangerous, the kind of dangerous that means you might literally be stabbed by your own king for disagreeing with him in a meeting. By 1568, Erik's condition deteriorates again. He's hearing voices. He's convinced of conspiracies everywhere. He refuses to eat for fear of poison. He's unpredictably violent or alternatively completely apathetic, locked in his own mind. His half-brothers John and Charles seize the moment. In September 1568, they rebel, capture the unstable king, and depose him. John III becomes king instead. Erik XIV is imprisoned, moved from castle to castle like a broken chess piece. Gripsholm, Västerås, Örbyhus. For 9 years he languishes there. His mental state fluctuates wildly. Sometimes he's hysterical, wailing and lamenting. Other times he's eerily calm, painting or playing music in his cell like a ghost haunting his own life. In 1577, likely on his brother John's order, Erik is poisoned with arsenic. Modern testing of his remains confirms it. He dies at 43, a broken man who perhaps didn't fully grasp what was happening to him anymore. Here's the brutal truth. Erik XIV's short reign showed how quickly paranoia could transform an enlightened prince into a monster. Unlike many mad monarchs who ordered atrocities from a safe distance, Erik committed them with his own hands. The Stura murders remain one of Swedish history's bloodiest royal crimes. His legacy warned that unchecked suspicion and mental illness in absolute power could turn a palace into a slaughterhouse. Yet if Erik's madness was explosive and violent, devastating and sudden, another royal's descent into insanity would unfold differently. Slower, more heartbreaking, a queen who loved so desperately that she couldn't let go of love, even in death. Chapter 9. Joanna of Castile, the Queen Who Loved Too Much. The year is 1479, and Toledo welcomes a princess. Her name is Joanna, third child of Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. She's intelligent, attractive, trained in statecraft. She seems absolutely destined for greatness. Then 1496 arrives. Joanna is 16 years old. She enters a dynastic marriage with Philip the Fair of Burgundy, the Habsburg heir. And here's the thing nobody told her. She falls passionately, deeply, completely in love with him. Not the polite kind of love that queens are supposed to feel. The desperate, all-consuming, can't eat, can't sleep kind of love. Philip is handsome, charming, also absolutely a libertine who spends considerable time pursuing other women, which means Joanna spends considerable time being absolutely furious about it. She's jealous, volatile, she weeps, she rages, she withdraws into herself. People around her start whispering. Is this passionate nature or early madness? Nobody's quite sure. Then between 1500 and 1504, something shifts. Joanna's elder siblings die. Suddenly she's the heiress. In 1504, Queen Isabella dies and names Joanna Queen of Castile. Joanna and Philip rush to Spain to claim her crown. Everything is about to change. In 1506, conflicts erupt over who gets to rule Castile, Philip or her father Ferdinand. Joanna, caught between her husband and her father, is a pawn in a chess game. Then Philip gets a fever. He dies. He's 28 years old. Joanna is 26 and absolutely shattered. What happens next is the stuff of legend and tragedy mixed together in the most disturbing way possible. Joanna exhibits erratic behavior. She becomes reluctant to part with Philip's corpse. She swings between hysterical sobbing and eerie, unsettling calm. Legend says she had Philip's coffin brought on a journey across Castile, like a macabre road trip, with a corpse. Legend says she opened it to embrace his decaying body. Whether that's literally true or not, her intense mourning is absolutely real. She keeps the coffin close for about a year at Tordesillas. She becomes furious, absolutely furious if any woman approaches it. She's jealous of a dead man. Let that sink in for a moment. She's delusional. The jealousy persists even after death, even though Philip can't exactly flirt with anyone anymore, even though he's literally decomposing, even though the smell must be absolutely catastrophic. By 1507, her father Ferdinand arrives like a concerned parent who's had enough. He reasserts himself as regent. He claims Joanna's mental state makes her incapable of ruling. Chroniclers note she's not of sound mind. She barely speaks. She neglects her appearance. She's developed a personality entirely built on paranoia. From 1509 onward, Joanna is confined to the royal convent palace of Tordesillas. Not for a few months, not for a few years. She'll remain there for 46 years. Effectively a state prisoner, while her father and then her son Charles rule in her name. At Tordesillas, she lives under house arrest. She alternates between melancholy calm and violent outbursts. She refuses to eat. She bangs on doors demanding to be let out. Sometimes she's relatively lucid. Other times she's convinced her food is poisoned. Other times she's lost in her own mind entirely. During the 1520 revolt of the Comuneros, rebels try to free her and use her as a figurehead, but she refuses to cooperate decisively, either from fear or confusion or simple exhaustion. Her captivity tightens afterward. Decades in isolation, occasionally visited by her youngest daughter Catherine, mostly alone. In 1555, Joanna dies at 75 in Tordesillas, still technically Queen of Castile. She spent 46 years confined, never released, never ruled. Only her daughter and a handful of servants mourn at her simple funeral. So here's the question that haunts historians. Was Joanna truly mad, or made mad by the men who imprisoned her? The answer is probably both. She suffered genuine mental illness. Absolutely. Triggered by grief, by childbirth trauma, by bereavement. But that illness was also exploited as a political tool to sideline her. The mad queen who traveled with her husband's corpse became a legend of obsessive love. The reality was far sadder. A capable woman lost to depression, trauma, and decades of captivity. By the time of her death, Joanna had outlived her husband by 49 years. But she never truly let him go. While Joanna suffered in Spanish isolation across the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire was conducting its own brutal experiment with royal sanity. They locked princes away in a palace, away from the world, and one would emerge so damaged, so fractured, that he'd barely recognize reality anymore. Chapter 10. Mustafa I of the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan who talked to ghosts. The year is 1591, and Istanbul welcomes a prince. His name is Mustafa, younger brother of Sultan Ahmed I. As a child, Mustafa witnesses something terrifying. The Ottoman Empire is changing its mind about how to handle rival princes. They used to kill them. All of them. Fratricide, clean, brutal, efficient. Now they've decided on something supposedly more humane. The Kafirs. That's right. A gilded cage. From age 14 to 28, Mustafa spends 14 years locked in this section of the harem with other rival princes. Claustrophobic, stressful, isolated. No training, no normal social contact, no idea if he'll ever leave alive. Just you, some other traumatized princes, and your thoughts. For 14 years. Psychologists have a term for what this does to a person. Completely catastrophic for mental health. In 1617, Sultan Ahmed I dies unexpectedly at 27. He leaves only minor sons. The throne has a problem. Who rules? In an unprecedented move, the Ottoman succession bypasses Ahmed's children entirely. It goes to the eldest Ottoman prince. It goes to Mustafa. At age 26, he's suddenly Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Likely to his own absolute shock. Immediately, eyewitnesses notice something is profoundly wrong. Mustafa bursts into fits of uncontrollable laughter or crying without any reason whatsoever. He wanders palace halls at night, peering behind curtains, calling out to unseen figures. Is he hallucinating? Is he paranoid that dead relatives haunt him? Probably both. One account describes him scattering gold coins into the Bosphorus from the palace. He claps his hands as if he's feeding fish. He converses with them, like they're his advisors. In imperial meetings, Mustafa is largely mute or makes completely irrelevant remarks. He leaves actual governance to eunuchs and his mother. This is not going well. By 1618, within 3 months of his reign, the Grand Vizier and Janissary leaders have had enough. They decide Mustafa is incapable of ruling. They depose him for his 14-year-old nephew, Osman II. Mustafa doesn't resist. He reportedly smiles as if relieved, which tells you everything you need to know about his mental state. He returns to confinement, but then Osman II gets overthrown and killed by mutinous Janissaries in 1622. Suddenly, the empire needs a figurehead again. They bring Mustafa back. His second reign lasts one tumultuous year of factional struggle. Mustafa's erratic interventions make everything worse. At Osman's funeral, he insists the dead sultan isn't actually dead. He orders food sent to Osman's grave. He opens the treasury and flings money to crowds. He addresses trees in gardens as if they were advisors. The empire runs on autopilot. His mother and the viziers handle actual governance, while Mustafa talks to vegetation. After a major Janissary revolt, the leadership decides Mustafa is too much of a liability. In 1623, he's deposed again, replaced by his young nephew Murad IV. This time, Mustafa is permanently confined to the cafés. For 16 years. 16 years he spends praying or playing with palace cats, largely oblivious to state affairs, while Murad IV rules with an iron fist. One chronicler writes that Mustafa seems almost peaceful in his confinement, as if the constant pressure of pretending to be sultan has finally lifted. Maybe it has. In 1639, Mustafa I dies at 47, still a state prisoner, but given respectful burial in the tombs at Hagia Sophia. So here's the brutal reality. Mustafa I is one of the only monarchs in history to be overthrown twice. He was known as both Veli, the saint, for his passive piety, and Deli, the mad one, for his fractured mind. He embodied a terrible truth. The Cafés tradition was supposed to prevent fratricide, supposed to be more humane than murder. Instead, it produced a sultan psychologically unfit to rule. Years of isolation, fear, and idleness didn't just break Mustafa. They shattered him into pieces that could never be reassembled. When they buried Mustafa, they buried also the fantasy that absolute power could function without a sound mind to wield it. From ancient Babylon to Ottoman Constantinople, we've witnessed kings and queens lose their minds across millennia. Grief destroyed some. Paranoia consumed others. Isolation fractured the rest. But the Age of Enlightenment wouldn't spare Europe from royal madness. In fact, it would produce some of the most elaborate delusions ever recorded. starting with a Bavarian king who lived in a fairy tale. Chapter 11. Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale king, who drowned in dreams. The year is 1864, and Bavaria gains a king who seems absolutely destined to rule with brilliance and vision. His name is Ludwig II. He's 18 years old, stunningly handsome, and obsessed with Wagner's operas and medieval romance. He seems like he walked out of one of his own fairy tales. Early in his reign, there are glimpses of promise. But here's the thing. Ludwig is painfully shy. He avoids court duties with the dedication of someone actively training for it. As Prussia dominates German unification in the 1860s and 1870s, Ludwig makes a decision. He retreats from politics entirely. Instead, he retreats into fantasy. He begins building extravagant castles. Neuschwanstein, the ultimate fairy tale castle, with turrets and white stone that looks like it belongs in a storybook rather than Bavaria. Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, modeled after Versailles, all of them extravagant, all of them expensive, all of them designed to look like operatic sets brought to life. His isolation grows darker. He sleeps all day, works at night. He refuses audiences. He communicates only through servants, speaking to almost nobody face to face. He becomes increasingly paranoid about being watched. Then comes the really alarming part. He dines alone at elaborate banquets set for imaginary guests. Sometimes he places life-sized dolls at the table to keep him company, just so he's not completely alone while he eats. By 1886, there's a problem. A massive problem. His castle building has bankrupted Bavaria. The government is broke. The ministers are furious. His uncle and the government plot intervention. They hire psychiatrists who declare him insane based on reports and rumors. They never actually examine him. They just declare him mad based on gossip. In June 1886, Ludwig is deposed and confined to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg. The day after he arrives, he and his psychiatrist, Dr. von Gudden, take a walk by the lake. Hours later, both are found dead in the shallow water. Just like that, both of them, dead. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Was it murder? Was Ludwig trying to escape and they both drowned? Was it an accident? Historians have debated this for over a century, and the truth remains locked in those cold lake waters. What we do know, Ludwig was 40 years old. His reign, which existed more in dreams than reality, ended in those murky waters. The king who built castles in the clouds couldn't survive in the world of men. His castles still stand today. Neuschwanstein is one of the most visited tourist attractions in Bavaria. People travel from around the world to see the fairy tale castle that a mad king built. But Ludwig never got to finish his story. Whether murdered or driven to despair, his final walk into Lake Starnberg was the last act of a beautiful tragedy. A monarch who chose fantasy over a kingdom that no longer wanted him. But Ludwig wasn't the only European royal whose withdrawal from reality would shock his court. Wasn't the only king whose mind became a prison of its own making. Further north, a Danish king was being manipulated by a sinister physician while his own mind crumbled into dust. A king whose tragedy would be far more prolonged, far more deliberate, and infinitely more cruel. Chapter 12. Christian VII of Denmark. The Puppet King. The year is 1766, and Copenhagen gains a king at the absolute worst possible time. His name is Christian VII. He's 17 years old. He's already showing signs of severe mental instability, erratic behavior, violent mood swings. He slaps himself in the face repeatedly. He can't concentrate. He's basically a walking red flag wrapped in royal robes. Early on, people hope he'll grow out of it. He doesn't. In 1768, Christian takes a royal tour of Europe to presumably seem normal and kingly. It goes catastrophically wrong. He assaults courtiers. He makes crude public statements. He plays childish pranks in front of diplomats. European courts watch in horror as the mad Danish king humiliates himself and his nation across the continent. Nobody knows what to do with him. Then Dr. Johann Struensee arrives. Struensee is Christian's German physician, and he makes a discovery. If you drug the king properly, you can essentially turn him into a hollow shell who signs whatever you put in front of him. So that's exactly what he does. Struensee gains total control over Christian, becomes de facto dictator of Denmark between 1770 and 1772. Meanwhile, he's also carrying on an affair with Queen Caroline Matilda, because apparently, if you're going to manipulate a king into compliance, you might as well seduce his wife, too. Why not go all in? Then in 1772, the nobles have had enough. They arrest Struensee, execute him for treason. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Because Christian is so thoroughly broken by this point that removing Struensee doesn't fix anything. The king is barely comprehending what's happening to him. He's kept as a figurehead, while a regency council actually rules Denmark. From 1784 onward, Christian's own son takes over as regent. The king is moved to Frederiksborg Castle in isolation. Sometimes he's violent. Sometimes he's catatonic. Sometimes he plays like a child, seemingly unaware that he's supposed to be an actual monarch. For over 40 years, Christian VII exists in isolation while everyone else runs his kingdom. He dies in 1808 at 59, having been essentially absent mentally since he was a teenager. Think about that for a moment. Over 40 years as a puppet. Over 40 years as a king who wasn't really a king. Over 40 years of exploitation, isolation, and irrelevance. So here's the brutal truth. Christian VII was perhaps history's ultimate puppet king, a crowned, empty vessel through which others ruled. His tragedy wasn't just personal madness, although that was devastating enough. His tragedy was total exploitation of that madness by the people who should have protected him. A physician who drugged him into compliance, a queen who betrayed him, nobles who used him as a convenient figurehead. Denmark learned the hard way that a king's mind matters as much as his crown. That unchecked power over an incapacitated ruler creates opportunity for catastrophe. But Christian's madness made him a puppet, controllable, manipulable, harmless. Our next ruler's insanity made him something far, far more dangerous. A paranoid tyrant with absolute power and a hair-trigger temper, a man whose madness wouldn't make him a victim. It would make him a monster. Chapter 13. Ivan IV of Russia, the Tsar who killed his own son. The year is 1547, and Moscow crowns its first Tsar of all Russia. His name is Ivan IV. He's 16 years old, and early in his reign he shows genuine promise. Legal reforms, expansion, vision. Then you learn about his childhood. His mother was poisoned, possibly by boyar nobles who ruled while he was young. He watched it happen. He was abused by the very people who should have protected him. So basically, Ivan's early years were less royal upbringing and more psychological warfare. In 1553, Ivan nearly dies from fever. After he recovers, something fundamental breaks inside him. The paranoia doesn't just intensify, it becomes his full-time job. He begins seeing enemies everywhere, conspiracies in every corner. The boyars want him dead. The church wants to undermine him. That advisor who disagreed with him yesterday? Definitely planning a coup. His mind becomes a fortress under siege, except the siege is imaginary, and he's the one with all the weapons. Then, in 1560, his beloved wife Anastasia dies. Ivan becomes absolutely convinced the boyars murdered her, and now his paranoia has fuel. Now it has proof, or at least proof in his mind. His mental state doesn't just deteriorate, it shatters completely. He oscillates between religious mania, hours of prayer, violent self-flagellation, and explosive violence against anyone he deems suspicious, which is basically everyone. So in 1565, he makes a decision that will haunt Russia for generations. He creates the Oprichnina, a personal terror force. The members, called the Oprichniki, have one job: root out traitors. Their method? Mass executions, torture, destruction of entire cities. In 1570, Ivan personally participates in the Novgorod massacre. Thousands are killed. And Ivan doesn't just order it from a throne like a normal tyrant. He goes to the cellars. He watches men roasted alive over fires. He watches prisoners impaled on stakes. He watches skin flayed from bodies. He watches bones systematically broken. Sometimes he picks up the instruments himself, because apparently supervising wasn't enough. His fits of rage become absolutely legendary. He suddenly attacks courtiers with his iron-pointed staff. One moment he's calm. The next, someone's bleeding. Then comes the remorse. Hours of prayer, self-flagellation, religious despair. Rinse and repeat. It's like watching someone cycle through an emotional arcade game where all the prizes are terrible. Then November 1581 arrives. Ivan is arguing with his eldest son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich. The argument escalates. During it, Ivan strikes his son in the head with his staff. The Tsarevich dies from the injuries 3 days later. Ivan has just killed his own son. His heir, his legacy, the future of Russia. Gone. Ivan falls into a depressive breakdown so profound that it's like watching someone actually understand consequences for the first time in their life. There's a famous painting by Repin that captures the moment. Ivan holding his dying son, eyes wide with the absolute realization of what he's done. That moment when you can't undo it, when you can't make it better with more violence or more prayer or more anything. His final years are marked by deteriorating health and continued paranoia. He dies in 1584, possibly poisoned, possibly just finally worn out from decades of violence and madness. Here's the brutal truth. Ivan the Terrible's reign proved that childhood trauma plus absolute power plus untreated mental illness equals absolute catastrophe. The Tsar who killed his own son in a moment of rage embodied how quickly a troubled mind can turn from protector to destroyer. Russia didn't just lose a prince that day, it lost its future. The Rurik dynasty's direct line ended with Ivan Ivanovich's death. Russia would need decades to recover from the destruction Ivan left behind. But Ivan's madness was fire and blood, explosive, destructive, obvious to everyone around him. Sometimes royal insanity wore a different mask entirely. Sometimes it hid behind the appearance of progress and enlightenment. In Russia, there would emerge another Tsar who modernized an empire, reformed its systems, brought it into the modern world. While personally torturing prisoners for entertainment in the palace cellars. Chapter 14. Peter the Great of Russia. The Brilliant Butcher. The year is 1682, and Moscow gains a co-Tsar at the absolute worst possible time. His name is Peter. He's 10 years old, sharing the throne with his half-brother Ivan V, which basically means neither of them is actually ruling anything. Then something happens that will haunt him forever. A palace coup. The Streltsy, elite guards, massacre his family members right in front of him. He watches it happen. He's a child, and he's watching people he loves die violently. Welcome to Peter's formative years. By 1689, Peter takes sole power and immediately decides Russia needs to completely transform. He's brilliant, visionary, a military strategist who revolutionizes warfare. He forces the nobility to adopt Western dress. He builds St. Petersburg from swampland. He creates a Russian navy from scratch. The man is genuinely innovative. Russia would not become a major European power without him. But beneath the brilliance, there's something profoundly broken. Peter exhibits violent mood swings, sadistic cruelty. His rages are absolutely legendary. One moment he's charming and visionary, discussing military tactics and cultural reform. The next moment, he's beating a courtier unconscious for some minor offense. He executes servants on whims. He tortures for entertainment. Basically, Peter is two people. One builds empires, the other tortures for fun. They take turns. In 1698, the Streltsy rebel again. Peter decides this is his opportunity for revenge for what they did to his family all those years ago. He cuts short his grand embassy to Europe, specifically to come back and handle this himself. He personally beheads Streltsy rebels. Not from a distance, personally, with his own hands. The axe is heavy. The work is exhausting. Blood spatters across his clothes and face. His arms ache. And he keeps going. He forces the nobility to do the same, making them participate in the carnage. Aristocrats who've never held a weapon, let alone an axe, are suddenly expected to execute people. Some vomit. Some collapse. Some refuse and are threatened with execution themselves. Peter watches all of it with visible enjoyment. He's laughing. Actually laughing. Like this is entertainment. Like he's at a theater production instead of presiding over a massacre. Reports describe him celebrating between executions, joking with courtiers, then returning to the next rebel with renewed energy. Because apparently, decapitating dozens of people is a reasonable way to work through childhood trauma. In total, over 1,100 Streltsy are executed between September 1698 and February 1699. Then there are the private torture sessions in the palace cellars. Peter personally participates in interrogating suspected traitors. He's not delegating this. He's there. He watches men broken on the rack, their bodies stretched until bones crack audibly. He watches skin torn from muscle. He watches eyes roll back as men scream. And he's engaged, asking questions, suggesting techniques, sometimes picking up instruments himself to demonstrate how it's done. Because apparently, designing a navy and torturing people for confession aren't mutually exclusive. Peter moves from the drafting table to the torture chamber like he's switching between two equally important hobbies. Then, in 1718, his own son becomes a problem. Tsarevich Alexei, Peter's heir, is suspected of treason. Peter suspects him of disloyalty, of plotting against the throne. So Alexei is arrested and tortured and dies under interrogation. Peter likely orders it. Peter likely participates. It's a horrifying echo of Ivan IV killing his own son, except Peter shows absolutely no remorse, no breakdown, no moment of realization, just cold acceptance that his son is gone. His final years are a descent into physical agony that no amount of imperial power can fix. Untreated syphilis ravages his body. His joints ache constantly. His skin erupts in sores. The pain is relentless. Then there's the urinary blockage. Imagine being unable to urinate. Imagine the pressure building, the burning, the desperation, the infection spreading through his body. Peter is literally rotting from the inside, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. In 1725, he dies at 52 in absolute agony. Here's the contradiction that haunts history. Peter the Great remains Russia's most contradictory ruler. visionary and monster, builder and destroyer. His brilliance gave Russia an empire, St. Petersburg, a navy, modernization. His madness gave it a legacy of autocratic cruelty, of torture as entertainment, of a ruler who could be enlightened one moment and sadistic the next. There are questions that historians still argue about. Can we call a man great when greatness was built on torture and terror? Can genius excuse cruelty? Can modernization justify murder? From Russia's violent czars, we return to Rome's original architects of madness, but not the theatrical lunacy of someone like Caligula. Our next emperor's insanity was cold, calculated. It festered in complete isolation, turning a brilliant mind into something far more dangerous. Chapter 15. Tiberius of Rome, the emperor who hid from power. 14 AD arrives in Rome, and the empire receives the world's most reluctant ruler. His name is Tiberius. He's 55 years old. And here's the thing. Nobody, including Tiberius himself, is excited about this. Augustus, the previous emperor, adopts Tiberius like a backup plan. Like hiring a substitute teacher nobody's excited about. Not because Augustus loves him, not because Tiberius is qualified, but because Augustus needs someone to hand the empire to, and Tiberius happened to be standing there. Tiberius doesn't want this job. He's made that abundantly clear. But nobody asked his opinion, and now he's the emperor of Rome whether he likes it or not. Spoiler alert, he does not. For the first 12 years, he actually manages to do a decent job. He's competent, strategic. He handles military matters reasonably well, but underneath, he's resentful. Deeply, profoundly resentful. And resentment has a way of turning into paranoia if you give it enough time. Between 14 and 26 AD, Tiberius rules from Rome while his brain slowly turns into a conspiracy machine. He's convinced everyone is plotting against him. Not maybe plotting. Absolutely, definitely plotting. Every conversation he overhears is obviously about him. Every closed-door meeting is obviously about overthrowing him. Every person who looks at him sideways is obviously measuring his neck for a knife. His paranoia isn't just bad. It's industrial scale. It's got infrastructure. It's got systems. It's got spreadsheets. Then, in 26 AD, Tiberius makes a decision that will define his entire legacy. He leaves Rome and never comes back. So the most powerful man on earth decides to run his entire empire from an island, specifically Capri, specifically a fortress on Capri where nobody can reach him and he can't reach anybody. For 11 years, the ruler of Rome abandons Rome entirely and governs from what is essentially the world's most expensive panic room. Think about that. On Capri, Tiberius's behavior spirals into territory so dark that even the ancient historians seem uncomfortable writing about it. Suetonius describes elaborate grotesqueries, disturbing sexual conduct that exploits the vulnerable. People literally hurled from cliffs because they displeased him. Orgies so depraved that the palace staff pretended not to know what was happening in the chambers at night. Are all these accounts true? Historians debate it constantly. Was it propaganda from senators who hated him? Probably some. Definitely exaggerated, almost certainly. But here's what's undeniable. Something fundamentally wrong was happening on that island. A man with absolute power, total isolation, and apparently no moral restraint was descending into genuine depravity. From his island fortress, Tiberius plays a sick game with an entire empire. He sends letters, just letters, sealed orders from Capri to Rome, and every time one arrives, the Senate enters absolute panic mode. Because these letters don't ask questions, they issue death sentences. They order arrests for crimes nobody can quite define. Treason becomes whatever Tiberius decides it is on any given Tuesday. People are convicted based on gossip, executed based on rumors, destroyed based on who they had lunch with. The empire doesn't run on law anymore. It runs on Tiberius's mood swings delivered by courier. Senators live in constant fear. One letter could end everything: your reputation, your family, your life. All from a man they haven't seen in 11 years. In 37 AD, after 23 years of ruling from self-imposed exile, Tiberius dies at 77. Some accounts suggest he was smothered by the Praetorian prefect Macro to speed up the succession. When Tiberius dies, Rome's response is silence. No massive funeral oration, no weeping crowds, no Senate members tearing their clothes in theatrical grief. Would you mourn the man who spent 11 years sending you death threats from an island? Would you shed tears for someone who executed your friends based on a bad dream he had? Rome's silence says everything. Here's the brutal truth. Tiberius proved that madness doesn't always announce itself with theatrical violence like Ivan or Peter. Sometimes it whispers. It turns a capable ruler into a recluse. It transforms an emperor into a hermit. It convinces a powerful man that the only safe place is complete isolation. Tiberius governed an empire while hiding from it. His legacy is loneliness, an emperor with absolute power who trusted no one and died unloved in his island prison. But Tiberius's paranoid isolation, his cold calculations, his decades of fear? That pales beside what's coming next. Our next royal was so inbred, so broken genetically, that merely existing was an achievement. A king whose body was literally falling apart, whose mind was unraveling piece by piece, whose very survival seemed like a defiant middle finger to the laws of nature itself. And he ruled one of the most powerful empires on earth. Chapter 16. Charles II of Spain, the Cursed King. It's the year 1665 in Madrid, and Spain receives a king who was never supposed to survive infancy. His name is Charles II. He's 4 years old, and his entire existence is a masterclass in what happens when a royal family decides that marrying your relatives is a better idea than, well, literally anything else. His parents were uncle and niece. Their parents were also closely related. Go back a few generations, and you'll find the same names appearing over and over like a broken record. The Habsburg family didn't just marry within the family. They married so much within the family that by the time Charles arrived, his inbreeding coefficient was higher than if his parents had been siblings. Let that sink in. Basically, Charles's family tree isn't a tree. It's a circle. His relatives didn't marry outward to other families. They married each other, again and again, for centuries. His grandparents were cousins. His parents were uncle and niece. It's like watching someone play chess against themselves and somehow still losing. By the time Charles was born, his bloodline had folded in on itself so many times that he was basically the genetic equivalent of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Charles's body arrives broken. He has severe Habsburg jaw. His lower jaw juts out so far that his teeth don't align. He can't chew food properly. He can't speak clearly. His tongue is oversized, making basic functions like eating and talking into ordeals. He suffers from constant illness. Genetic disorders cascade through his system like dominoes. Probable learning disabilities, possibly mild intellectual disability. The Spaniards look at him and whisper. They call him El Hechizado, the bewitched. Because surely, they think, no curse could be worse than this. Surely demons must be possessing him. Surely this is supernatural. They're wrong. It's just genetics. Brutal, unforgiving, generational genetics. Charles grows up like a person who's physically in the room, but mentally checked out. He's there, but also, He's not there. It's like watching someone play a king in a play, except he forgot his lines, and also he's the actual king. One observer describes him perfectly. He has a melancholy and somber expression and appears to be a ghost. The court watches as various factions control him. His mother, his half-brother, advisors who see him as a puppet. Nobody's really in charge, which means nobody's in charge at all. Spain's power starts to crumble. While other European nations are rising, Spain is being led by a man who can barely lead himself. Then comes the real problem: the succession. Charles marries not once but twice, 2 different women, 2 chances to produce an heir and continue the dynasty. Nothing happens. Complete and total infertility. Probably hormonal issues from generations of inbreeding. Possibly just the genetic weight of centuries of relatives marrying relatives finally coming due. Spain's succession crisis doesn't just loom, it becomes the entire conversation. How does the greatest empire on earth continue when its king literally cannot produce a child? The church decides to help. They perform exorcisms, multiple exorcisms, priests chanting, holy water splashing, prayers to cast out the demons they're convinced are possessing the cursed king. It doesn't work, because you can't exorcise genetics. You can't pray away a collapsing bloodline. You can't perform miracles for someone whose body is literally the result of centuries of incestuous marriages. Charles lives like this for decades, melancholic, prone to fits, sometimes not recognizing courtiers, a king in name, a ghost in practice. In 1700, at age 38, Charles dies without an heir. The Spanish Habsburg line doesn't just end, it simply stops, like a record player running out of music, like a candle that finally burned out. After centuries of power and glory, the Spanish Habsburgs go extinct not with a bang, but with a whimper. His death triggers the war of Spanish succession because Europe has to figure out who inherits an empire with no heir. So here's the reality. Charles II was born to do a job his body and mind couldn't handle. The cursed king wasn't actually cursed. He was just the final product of a bloodline that had been marrying itself in circles for so long that it literally collapsed. His tragedy wasn't supernatural. It was biological, pure, undeniable, genetic catastrophe. But here's the thing. Charles II lived in the 1600s. Genetics didn't exist yet. DNA was centuries away from being discovered. The Habsburgs had no idea that marrying their cousins and uncles and nieces was literally destroying their bloodline at a molecular level. So when they looked at Charles, they saw a curse. They saw demons. They saw the supernatural because they had no framework for understanding the natural. We know better now. We can look back and see exactly what happened. Generations of inbreeding collapsing a dynasty from the inside out. But they couldn't. They could only watch their king decay and assume it was witchcraft. The Spanish Habsburgs didn't fall to rival powers or political betrayal. They fell because they married themselves into oblivion. Because at a certain point, biology wins. And they had no idea biology was even playing the game. But while Spain was breeding itself to extinction, Austria's Habsburgs were cooking up their own disaster. An emperor so unstable, so bewildering, that his sanest moment became the stuff of historical legend. Chapter 17. Ferdinand I of Austria. I am the emperor, and I want dumplings. The year 1835 arrives in Vienna, and Austria gains an emperor who probably should have stayed home. His name is Ferdinand I. He's 42 years old, and he is profoundly, visibly, catastrophically unfit to rule an empire. Severe epilepsy, We're talking 5 to 20 seizures per day. Hydrocephalus, basically water on the brain, like his skull decided to install a swimming pool. Jaw deformity, speech impediments, possible intellectual disability, stacked on top of everything else like some kind of terrible neurological lasagna. Basically, Ferdinand is what happens when genetics decides to go absolutely rogue. His father, Franz I, knew the truth. Ferdinand couldn't rule. Absolutely couldn't. But admitting that would cause a political crisis, and Franz I was more afraid of a constitutional scandal than he was of putting a severely epileptic man in charge of an empire. So he just handed him the crown and hoped for the best. Classic parenting. Ignore the problem and let the next generation figure it out. Ferdinand's advisors essentially run the empire. They make all the decisions. They sign all the documents. They handle all the actual governance. Ferdinand shows up, exists in the general vicinity of power, and occasionally says things. Mostly about food, and the things he says become instant legend. I am the emperor, and I want dumplings. That's his most famous statement, not a speech about governance, not a declaration of policy, a statement about dumplings. When someone tells him he can't have something, Ferdinand responds with childlike simplicity. I am the Kaiser Emperor, and what I want must be done. He's not wrong, technically. He is the emperor. But the fact that he's using imperial authority to demand dumplings tells you everything you need to know about his mental state. Here's the thing, though. Ferdinand is genuinely kind. Unlike Ivan or Peter or Tiberius, Ferdinand has absolutely no interest in torturing anyone. He's not paranoid. He's not sadistic. He's just confused, overwhelmed. A genuinely sweet man trapped in a body that won't cooperate and a job that makes no sense to him. The court handles him with genuine affection, mixed with deep pity. They treat him like a beloved uncle who showed up to Thanksgiving and doesn't quite understand how TV remotes work. Then 1848 arrives, and revolution sweeps across Europe. Austria convulses with political upheaval, nationalist movements, constitutional demands, the entire political order shaking. Ferdinand is bewildered. He doesn't understand what's happening. Why is everyone so angry? Why are people in the streets? What are these revolutionary demands? He's like someone who walked into the middle of an action movie and genuinely can't figure out the plot. His advisors look at each other and basically give each other the universal nod of, okay, we're done here. In December 1848, they gently suggest that maybe Ferdinand should abdicate. Not because there's a scandal, not because there's a catastrophe, just because everyone, and we mean everyone, agrees this experiment has run its course. Ferdinand doesn't fight it, doesn't argue, doesn't stage a dramatic tantrum like most royals would. He just abdicates, saying he's perfectly happy to do so because he never understood politics anyway, which is possibly the most honest thing any monarch has ever said. He moves to Prague Castle and lives quietly for the next 27 years. No drama, no scandal, no tragedy. Just a gentle, confused man living out his days in peace, finally free from a job he was never equipped to do. He dies in 1875 at 82. Here's the truth that separates Ferdinand from everyone else on this list. He proves that disability or incapacity doesn't always mean tragedy. Ferdinand was severely disabled, profoundly incapable of governance, but he was surrounded by competent people who handled things quietly. The emperor who wanted dumplings lived a longer, happier life than many brilliant rulers on this list. Ferdinand's gentle incompetence meant Austria's transition happened peacefully. His advisors managed the empire quietly. History moved forward without bloodshed or tragedy. But not every mad king was so fortunate. Bavaria, Ferdinand's neighbor, would soon produce another mad king from this same era. A king whose confusion wouldn't be managed kindly. A king whose isolation would drag him into genuine darkness. A king whose fate would be infinitely darker than Ferdinand's quiet abdication. A king whose madness would become his prison. Chapter 18. Otto of Bavaria, the king who never ruled. The year 1886 arrives in Bavaria, and the European kingdom faces an impossible problem. Ludwig II, the fairy tale king, dies mysteriously in Lake Starnberg. His body is found in shallow water. The circumstances are murky, the cause unclear, but the succession is crystal clear. Ludwig's younger brother Otto should become king. Except Otto has been locked in an asylum since 1883. Otto isn't unwell. Otto isn't recovering. Otto is profoundly, completely, undeniably insane. And unlike Ferdinand in Austria, Otto doesn't get to choose his fate. Otto doesn't get to abdicate peacefully. Otto becomes king while imprisoned, and he'll stay imprisoned for the next 30 years. Otto's descent began years earlier, during the Franco-Prussian War between 1870 and 1871. Otto served in combat, actually fought, witnessed horrific violence, soldiers dying around him, blood, chaos, the kind of things that break people. What we'd now call severe PTSD absolutely demolishes Otto's mind. Hallucinations, violent outbursts, paranoia that spirals into something much darker. By 1873, his mental state is deteriorating visibly. By the early 1880s, he's experiencing full psychosis. He doesn't recognize his own family. He attacks servants for no reason. He oscillates between catatonic silence and violent mania. His family has no choice. They institutionalize him in 1883. And when Ludwig II dies in 1886, Otto becomes king while locked in a psychiatric hospital. He never chooses this. He never consents. He simply becomes monarch while imprisoned. The Phantom King. That's what history calls him. Otto I, King of Bavaria, except he never actually rules, never appears in public, never makes a single decision, never even understands he's king. His uncle Luitpold becomes regent and runs Bavaria in Otto's name for 26 years. Then his cousin Ludwig III takes over. All while Otto sits in Fürstenried Palace, locked away, completely unaware that he's the sovereign of an entire nation. 30 years. 3 decades. Otto spends 30 years confined to a palace, basically forgotten by everyone, including himself. But unlike Ferdinand's quiet abdication, Otto's confinement is not kind. Most days are quiet, yes, but some days are violent. Otto attacks the palace staff without warning or reason. He screams at imaginary threats. He has to be physically restrained. The doctors administer sedatives to calm him. These are the days the staff dreads, the days Otto becomes a danger to himself and everyone around him. On his better days, when the confusion lifts slightly, Otto paints. He has some genuine artistic ability when his mind isn't completely fractured, so at least he has that. But mostly he's just imprisoned, locked away, lost in his own mind, lost in his own palace, lost in a role he never wanted and never understood, and most importantly, a role he never chose. A king in name only, except even the name doesn't mean anything to him. A prisoner who happens to wear a crown that nobody will let him take off. In 1913, the Bavarian government finally admits what everyone already knows. They formally depose Otto. They change the constitution so Ludwig III can actually be king, instead of just pretending to be regent for an invisible monarch. Otto doesn't protest, doesn't fight it, doesn't really notice, Because Otto doesn't notice much of anything anymore. He continues in confinement, continues painting, continues existing in that strange space between life and death, like a ghost who doesn't realize he's haunting his own palace. The government releases him from the title, but they don't release him from the palace. He's still locked away, still confined, still the invisible king, now without even the crown to show for it. In 1916, at age 68, Otto dies. He's been king for 30 years. Never crowned, never ruled, never truly aware of it, never given a choice about any of it. Here's the contrast that haunts this story. Ferdinand of Austria from the previous chapter was disabled and incapable, but he was surrounded by competent, caring people who managed things quietly, and when it was time, he chose to abdicate. He found peace in Prague Castle. He lived out his final years contentedly. Otto of Bavaria was also disabled and incapable, but he was locked away against his will. He was imprisoned in a palace. His confinement wasn't merciful. It was punishment. 30 years of being king without knowing it, 30 years of violent episodes and sedation and restraint, 30 years of being a prisoner in his own body and his own kingdom. Otto never had Ferdinand's mercy, never had Ferdinand's choice, never had Ferdinand's peace. The invisible king spent 3 decades as a ghost haunting his own palace while the world moved on without him. He became a footnote to history, but a footnote while he was still alive. A man whose entire reign happened without him knowing it was happening. From Bavaria's invisible king, we travel back 2 millennia to an ancient ruler whose madness had the opposite problem. Everyone saw it, everyone knew, and it would cost him absolutely everything. Chapter 19. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the king called the Madman. Imagine an empire on the brink of collapse, desperately needing a competent ruler to stabilize it. Now imagine what happens when instead you get a man from the ancient Greek world who believes he is literally a god. But he also hands out coins to random strangers in the streets, gets drunk with fishmongers at parties, and thinks the solution to the empire's problems is deliberately desecrating the holiest temple of an entire religious group. That man is Antiochus IV, and this is his story. The year 175 BC brings him to power. He takes the throne of the Seleucid Empire, a massive Hellenistic kingdom, which basically means it's the ancient Greek world that conquered vast territories under Alexander the Great. But now it's crumbling, dying, weak. Antiochus takes one look at this situation and decides he knows exactly what to do. He announces that he is a god. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally divine. He takes the title Epiphanes, which means God manifest. He's declaring himself divinity incarnate. The empire's courtiers nod respectfully. Everyone else starts calling him Epiphanes behind his back, the madman. Antiochus's behavior is absolutely bizarre for a god king. He walks through marketplaces and casually tosses coins to random people, just hands them out, free money from the king. It's bizarre. It's undignified. It's the kind of thing commoners do, not divine rulers. He shows up at street festivals and parties like he's just another guy. He drinks wine with common workers. He dances. He laughs. He mingles with people who sell fish in the marketplace. A god king is supposed to be distant, untouchable, above everyone. Antiochus gets drunk with fishmongers. For a Hellenistic god king, this is absolutely scandalous behavior. It's either genuine eccentricity or the world's worst PR campaign. Either way, it's erratic, it's unstable, it's not how divinity is supposed to behave. Then come his religious policies, and things get genuinely dark. Antiochus decides that everyone in his empire needs to be Hellenized. Forced cultural assimilation. Everyone speaks Greek. Everyone follows Greek customs. Everyone worships Greek gods, including the Jews. In 167 BC, Antiochus takes it to the extreme. He outlaws Jewish religious practices entirely. He forbids Jewish worship. He forbids Jewish sacrifice. Then he goes to Jerusalem and commits an act designed to humiliate an entire people. He goes to the Jewish temple, the holiest site in Judaism, and sacrifices a pig inside it. Now, here's what makes this so deliberately cruel. Jewish people don't eat pork. Never. It's forbidden by their religion. Pigs are considered unclean, disgusting, spiritually contaminated. So Antiochus doesn't just desecrate the temple, he does it with the one animal that represents everything forbidden and unclean to Jewish faith. It's like targeting the exact thing that will cause maximum religious and spiritual humiliation. He then dedicates the entire temple to Zeus, the Greek god. Your holiest site is now a Greek temple. Your most sacred space belongs to someone else's god. It's not just cruel. It's calculated humiliation. It's designed to break a people's connection to their faith. The response is immediate and furious. The Maccabean revolt explodes across Judea. Jewish fighters rise up against Antiochus's religious extremism. His policies, considered irrational even by his contemporaries, have sparked massive rebellion. But Antiochus doesn't stop. His military campaigns become increasingly reckless. Egypt, Persia, massive expenditures draining the treasury for campaigns that make no strategic sense. His decisions defy logic. They reek of desperation and megalomania. Then comes his personality cult. Elaborate festivals celebrating Antiochus as divine. Gold statues of himself placed throughout his empire. He forces subjects to worship his image. It's the kind of narcissistic madness that rivals Caligula's worst impulses. In 164 BC, Antiochus dies during a campaign in Persia. Disease, possibly poison, possibly insanity. Ancient accounts suggest he died raving, consumed by regret for his failures. Here's the ironic truth. Antiochus IV desperately wanted to be remembered as God manifest. Divinity incarnate, immortal greatness. Instead, he got the opposite. History remembers him as the madman. His name didn't become synonymous with power or godhood. It became synonymous with fanatical stupidity, with zealotry gone wrong, with a ruler so consumed by his own delusions that he destroyed his own empire. But here's where it gets really ironic. His name lives on not in glory, but in infamy. The Jewish people created an entire holiday, Hanukkah, specifically to celebrate defeating him, to celebrate the overthrow of Antiochus. So instead of being remembered as a god, Antiochus became the villain in someone else's religious story. The tyrant they celebrate defeating once a year. The cautionary tale. The madman whose name became shorthand for ruler who destroys everything through religious extremism. But Antiochus's madness was ideological. It came from fanaticism and delusion. Our next ruler's madness would be far more visceral. Physical cruelty so extreme and so deliberate, his name would become legend. A name whispered in horror. A name that defined an entire era. Chapter 20. Vlad III of Wallachia, the Impaler, the name that defined horror. The year 1448 arrives in Wallachia, and a man named Vlad III takes power in a small, brutal corner of medieval Europe. His name will become legend, but not for anything heroic, not for conquering enemies or building monuments or writing poetry, for something far, far worse. Vlad's childhood was a masterclass in trauma. His father was assassinated. His brother was buried alive by enemies. Vlad himself was held captive by the Ottoman Empire for years, tortured, abused, broken by men who wanted to use him as leverage. Basically, Vlad had the worst childhood in medieval Europe, and that's saying something in an era where childhood was generally pretty brutal. When Vlad finally takes power, something fundamental inside him has shattered. He is a man remade by pain into something that barely qualifies as human. Vlad discovers a method of execution that will define his entire legacy. Impalement. It works like this. A wooden stake, sharpened to a point. Victims are placed on it. The stake pierces through their torso. Not quick, not merciful. Hours pass, sometimes days. The victim hangs there, skewered, dying slowly while their body gradually slides further down the stake as gravity and muscle failure take their toll. It's basically the worst theme park ride ever invented, except instead of thrills, you get agony. Instead of a souvenir photo, you get death. And Vlad uses this method constantly. Not just against enemies, against nobles who displease him, against anyone he decides has offended him, against peasants, against merchants, against anyone, really, who gives him a reason to reach for a stake. The scale becomes incomprehensible. Contemporary accounts, possibly exaggerated, but based on terrifying reality, describe forests of impaled victims, thousands of wooden stakes, thousands of dying people creating what witnesses literally called forests of the dying. The air thick with the sounds of agony, the stench of death and human waste, and blood. You could literally smell Vlad's bad mood from miles away. Ottoman envoys are invited to meet with Vlad. They arrive expecting diplomacy, maybe some negotiation, possibly a nice meal. Instead, they're greeted by a forest of impaled Turkish prisoners, 20,000 stakes, 20,000 dying men arranged in deliberate patterns. It's basically the world's worst welcome committee. The Ottoman army, legendary warriors who've conquered empires, takes one look at this nightmare and turns around. They leave. They refuse to engage. Because psychological warfare doesn't get more effective than this. But Vlad's cruelty extends far beyond impalement. Burning alive, people locked in buildings set on fire while Vlad watches, boiling alive. Victims submerged in boiling water until their skin sloughs off. Skinning alive, exactly what it sounds like. Cutting off limbs, slowly, methodically, watching people experience the agony of their own dismemberment. And here's the part that separates calculated cruelty from genuine madness. Vlad reportedly dines among his impaled victims. He sits at a table surrounded by dying, screaming people and eats his meal. Imagine the dinner conversation. "Pass the salt, would you? Also, try not to let that dying man's blood drip on the bread." One account describes Vlad inviting every beggar and vagrant in Wallachia to a great feast. Thousands of poor people come, hoping for food and aid. Vlad locks them in a building and sets it on fire. When asked why, he explains he was ridding Wallachia of useless people, which is possibly the most brutal interpretation of social welfare policy in human history. Whether Vlad is genuinely insane or simply brilliant at psychological warfare is a question historians still debate. Some argue he's a calculated leader using terror as political tool. Survival requires ruthlessness. It's pragmatic. It's strategic. Others see a sadistic psychopath. Someone who took genuine pleasure in human suffering. Someone for whom cruelty wasn't a means to an end. It was the end itself. He didn't torture people to control them. He controlled people so he could torture them. The truth is probably both, which somehow makes it worse. In 1476, Vlad dies in battle against the Ottomans, or possibly assassinated by his own boyars. The details are unclear. His head is taken as a trophy to Istanbul. But Vlad's death doesn't end his legend, it amplifies it. His name becomes synonymous with horror, with medieval darkness. Centuries later, when Bram Stoker writes Dracula in 1897, he bases his vampire on Vlad the Impaler. Because what is Dracula but a supernatural being who feeds on human suffering? Vlad the real man was perhaps more terrifying than Dracula the fiction. He didn't need supernatural powers to drain the life from thousands. He just needed a really committed work ethic and absolutely no empathy. Human sadism sufficed. Vlad's legacy is written in blood on wooden stakes. His name defined an era. His cruelty became legend. His suffering, inflicted on countless others, transformed him into vampire mythology. But Vlad's medieval cruelty feels distant now. Ancient, historical. Madness wouldn't stay in the past, though. It would march directly into the modern era, wearing a military uniform and a political ideology. It would nearly destroy an entire continent, and it would make Vlad the Impaler look like a footnote. Chapter 21. Wilhelm II of Germany, the Kaiser whose ego started a world war. He was born with a damaged left arm. By adulthood, it would be weak and roughly 6 inches shorter than his right. Yet in 1888, at just 29 years old, that same man became the most powerful ruler in Europe. His name is Wilhelm II, and for the next 30 years, his insecurity would literally burn down a continent. Wilhelm's birth injury left him feeling physically incomplete, insufficient. But instead of accepting this, he made a fateful decision. He would spend the rest of his life proving he was the most powerful man alive through sheer force of will and military dominance. Basically, he decided that if his body was incomplete, he'd just conquer Europe instead. Seemed logical at the time. Wilhelm's personality is best described as unstable with violent mood swings. One moment he's charming and brilliant. The next moment he's screaming at advisors like they're incompetent fools. He genuinely believes he's destined for greatness. He sees enemies everywhere. Basically, Wilhelm is what happens when you give massive insecurity a crown and an army. In 1890, Wilhelm fires Otto von Bismarck. You know Bismarck? The man who unified Germany, the genius who created modern Germany, the most brilliant political strategist in European history. Wilhelm fires him because Bismarck keeps saying things like, "That's a terrible idea, Your Majesty," and "We should probably think this through." Wilhelm finds this incredibly annoying. He wants advisors who will agree with him. Yes men, sycophants, people who will nod enthusiastically while Wilhelm talks about his brilliant ideas. Which is how you go from having the greatest political mind in Europe advising you to surrounding yourself with people whose primary qualification is the ability to keep their mouths shut and smile. Then Wilhelm becomes obsessed with something completely insane. Building a massive navy. Germany is a land power. Its entire military strength comes from its army. This is basic strategy. This is something every military expert understands. Wilhelm doesn't care about any of that. He looks at Britain's navy and decides Germany needs one bigger. Not for strategic reasons, just because he needs to prove he's bigger than everyone else. It's like a man with a fancy car deciding he also needs a mega yacht because his neighbor has one too. It makes no logical sense, but he needs it anyway. This obsession helps trigger World War I by absolutely terrifying Britain. Because now Britain thinks Germany is planning to challenge them militarily. The naval arms race becomes a symbol of German aggression. In July 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated in Sarajevo. The entire continent holds its breath. This is the moment, the critical moment. One calm, rational decision could prevent catastrophe. One thoughtful response could keep Europe at peace. Wilhelm's response? He tells Austria-Hungary, "Do whatever you want. Germany supports you. Go to war if you feel like it. I'll back you up." He essentially hands Austria a blank check and says, "Go crazy," which is absolutely not what a responsible leader does in a crisis. It's what an impulsive, insecure man does when he wants to prove he's powerful enough to start a world war. The dominoes fall. Austria invades Serbia. Russia mobilizes. Germany declares war. France mobilizes. Germany invades Belgium. Britain declares war. Within weeks, all of Europe is at war. Millions will die. 4 empires will collapse. Civilizations will be destroyed. And Wilhelm started it. During the war, Wilhelm becomes increasingly unmoored from reality. He's convinced of German invincibility even as the war goes catastrophically wrong. His mood swings between euphoria and depression. He overrules military experts with disastrous decisions driven purely by ego. In 1918, Germany loses. Wilhelm abdicates and flees to the Netherlands. He spends the rest of his life in exile, never taking responsibility for the catastrophe he created, never admitting his role, never understanding that his insecurity and narcissism killed millions. He dies in Dutch exile in 1941, bitter and delusional to the end. Here's the brutal truth. Wilhelm II proves that royal madness didn't die with medieval tyrants or ancient emperors. It didn't get better. It just got organized. It put on a military uniform. It learned to use modern weapons. It got a throne in the most technologically advanced nation in Europe. The damaged arm never healed. The insecurity never faded. But now, instead of torturing a few hundred people, Wilhelm could mobilize millions. Instead of one man's cruelty, he created industrial-scale suffering. His ego killed millions. His insecurity destroyed 4 empires. His need to prove himself to the world nearly destroyed civilization itself. But Wilhelm's madness roared and conquered. What of a king whose madness whispered and paralyzed? We turn now to Portugal, where melancholy wore a crown and a single decision would haunt an entire reign. Chapter 22. Edward of Portugal, the Melancholic King. The year 1433 arrives in Portugal, and a man named Duarte becomes king at 42 years old. He is well-educated, thoughtful. He writes philosophy. He composes treatises about virtue and human nature. He is also profoundly, chronically depressed, which is not ideal when you're responsible for running an entire country. Duarte suffers from what we would now call major depressive disorder. Deep sadness that doesn't lift, inability to make decisions, physical symptoms that rack his body. Insomnia, loss of appetite, the weight of sadness that never seems to lighten. In his writings, Duarte includes a section on melancholy. He describes it with remarkable accuracy. The heaviness, the paralysis, the way sadness becomes a prison you can't escape. He's writing about himself. He knows exactly what he has. He just can't cure it. Duarte's biggest crisis arrives in 1437 when his brother, Prince Henry the Navigator, proposes an expedition to Tangier. It seems straightforward. An invasion. A military campaign. A decision a king should be able to make in days. Duarte agonizes over it for months. He changes his mind repeatedly. One day he approves the expedition. The next day he revokes approval. His advisors watch helplessly as their king spirals through indecision. This is classic depression, not laziness, not stupidity, the paralysis of a mind that can't commit to anything because everything feels impossible. Imagine being a general waiting for your king's decision, and after 3 months you're like, "Your Majesty, can we please just do something? Anything. We could invade. We could not invade. We could go bowling. Just pick one." Finally, exhausted by months of internal torment, Duarte approves the expedition. It's catastrophic. The campaign fails immediately. Portugal's forces are destroyed. His brother Fernando is captured by Moorish forces. And then Fernando dies in captivity. Duarte is consumed by guilt. His indecision killed his brother. His inability to make a choice led to disaster. The weight of that guilt, piled on top of his already crushing depression, becomes unbearable. In 1438, just 6 years into his reign, Duarte dies at 46 years old. Officially, it's plague. Contemporary sources blame disease, and the death certificate says plague. Everyone knows it's really death by sad thoughts. The people who knew him understood the truth. Depression had finally won. The chronic sadness, the stress, the guilt, the weight of a mind that couldn't stop punishing itself. All of it weakened him until his body simply gave up. Here's the brutal truth about Duarte. His madness wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. It wasn't theatrical like so many rulers we've discussed. It was quiet. It was internal. It was the kind of suffering that nobody could see, but everyone around him could feel. Duarte understood his own melancholy with remarkable self-awareness. He wrote about it. He analyzed it. He tried to understand it intellectually. Duarte basically wrote the textbook on depression and still couldn't escape it, which is depressing in itself. His short reign shows that madness doesn't always announce itself with violence or chaos. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it paralyzes. Sometimes it slowly crushes a good man who simply couldn't escape the sadness inside his own mind. Edward of Portugal died young, broken not by violence, but by the weight of sadness he couldn't lift. But Duarte's gentle melancholy seems almost peaceful compared to what's coming next. Our final subject is a queen mother whose violent instability would traumatize everyone around her, including her own daughter. Chapter 23. Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg, the mother who held death too close. The year 1599 arrives in Prussia, and a girl named Maria Eleonora is born. She is beautiful, artistic, emotionally sensitive from childhood. But sensitivity has a darker side. She's prone to dramatic emotional outbursts, intense, overwhelming feelings that she can't quite control, the kind of instability that runs deeper than mere moodiness. In 1620, Maria Eleonora marries Gustav II, Adolphus of Sweden, one of Europe's greatest military commanders. She becomes obsessively devoted to him. Clingy. The kind of devoted that makes her friends roll their eyes and say, "Maria, he's going to war, not disappearing forever." But Gustav is always gone. Military campaigns, battles, war. He leaves Maria alone for months at a time, and during his absences, she descends into hysteria. Desperate letters, emotional pleas, a woman drowning in abandonment. Basically, Maria is the world's neediest military wife. Gustav wants to conquer Europe. Maria wants Gustav to write her love letters. They have very different priorities. Then comes the baby. After multiple miscarriages and stillbirths, Maria finally gives birth to a daughter named Christina in 1626. But it's a girl, not a son, not the heir everyone wanted. Maria shows rejection toward her own infant. She wanted a prince. She got a princess. And instead of accepting this beautiful child, Maria basically ghosted her own daughter. Then 1632 arrives, and everything shatters. Gustav II Adolf is killed at the Battle of Lutzen. Maria Eleonora's grief doesn't just devastate her. It consumes her entirely. It transforms into something pathological, something psychotic. She keeps Gustav's embalmed heart in a golden casket. She carries it everywhere. She sleeps with it. She holds it like a talisman against the darkness. She refuses to let his body be buried. For over a year, Gustav remains unburied. His corpse in the royal palace while Maria clutches his heart and refuses to let him go. Then she drapes the entire palace in black. Every room, every hallway, every chamber, even the windows are covered so no light enters. The royal palace becomes a tomb, a monument to grief so consuming it blackens everything it touches. Basically, Maria has created the world's most depressing interior design project. Black everywhere, a dead body, a golden heart casket. It's like staying at the saddest hotel ever built. And then there's Christina. Maria forces her young daughter to sleep in a black draped room next to her father's unburied coffin. A child, forced to sleep beside death every night, forced to exist in darkness and decay, while her mother clutches a heart and weeps. Years later, Christina writes about this. The trauma, the horror, her mother's violent mood swings, the suffocating grief, the physical abuse, a child traumatized by her mother's madness. In 1636, the Regency Council finally intervenes. They remove Christina from Maria's custody. The child's mental health is collapsing under the weight of her mother's psychosis. Maria Eleonora's behavior only worsens from there. Violent tantrums, paranoid accusations, self-harm. At this point, everyone around Maria is like, "We don't know what to do with you, but you can't keep doing this." The Swedish government essentially confines her, unable to manage her escalating instability. In 1654, at age 55, Maria Eleonora dies. Bitter, isolated, having traumatized her daughter so severely that Christina, now Queen of Sweden, refuses to attend her funeral. Here's the brutal truth. Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg ends our journey through royal madness not with political catastrophe, not with wars or empires falling. She ends it with intimate tragedy. A mother's grief so consuming it poisoned her own child's life. She held death too close for too long, dragging her daughter into the darkness. When she died, Christina barely mourned. The cycle of madness and trauma finally broken. Maria Eleonora's story reminds us that sometimes the most damaging insanity isn't the kind that topples empires. It's the kind that happens behind closed doors, in black-draped rooms, where a child learns that love and horror can share the same embrace. And with her, our journey almost ends. From Nebuchadnezzar's bestial crawling to Maria Eleonora's macabre grief, we've witnessed 23 rulers whose minds betrayed them. And with them, kingdoms fell, dynasties ended, millions suffered. Some were victims of genetics, others of trauma, still others of the crushing weight of absolute power with no one to say no. But all shared one truth. When the mind that wears the crown breaks, the consequences echo through history. These weren't just mad kings and queens. They were warnings, cautionary tales written in blood and tears, reminders that the greatest throne on earth can't protect against the fragility within our own skulls. As you drift to sleep tonight, remember, behind every crown was a human mind, fragile as glass, powerful as empires, and sometimes, tragically, lost in darkness. Yet in understanding their stories, we understand ourselves a little better. Sweet dreams, dear dreamer.